Thank you so much for doing this for us. As you see, we've already, yes, wow, we have a wonderful crowd, 45 so far. So
awesome.
Yes, turning it over to you.
And okay, yeah, ready to get started. Yeah, thank you so much for inviting me here to talk to y'all today. I'm super excited to be here. Before coming up here to work at Cornell, I was actually living and working in Florida for 4 years, so it's cool to sort of virtually be back down there. But yeah, my name is Alli, and I'm the project coordinator for Merlin here at the Cornell Lab of Ornithology. And I'm still pretty new. I started just in December, and before coming to Cornell, I was, like I just said, working in Florida as a biologist, studying seabirds and running citizen science programs. And then more recently, I've spent the last 2 years as a guide at an eco lodge. And through all that work over the last 6 years or so, I've really seen and appreciated how powerful the birding community can be in making positive change for our environment. And I've become really passionate about encouraging people to get out birding for the first time and learn about the birds around them. And that's why I'm really excited to be working with Merlin here. It's such a powerful tool for anybody almost anywhere in the world to learn about their local backyard birds. And our newest addition to Merlin, Sound ID, is what's been really exciting and really successful, and what I'm going to be focusing on today. But before I start, I wanted to make a note that if there are any young birders watching today, or if you know of any teenagers who are passionate about birds, I wanted to share that we just opened up applications for this year's Young Birders event at the lab. And I was actually a student in this event 12 years ago as a high school student. And this year I get to be one of the leaders for it. So I'm really excited about that. It's a 4-day-long overnight camp here in Ithaca, New York, where students will stay in the dorms on Cornell's campus. And the whole goal of the event is to introduce students to a whole bunch of different career paths in ornithology. So the students will get to meet biologists and museum curators and computer scientists and sound recordists and learn about what they do. And of course, we're going to spend a lot of time birding too. That's always a lot of fun. So applications are open to any high school student anywhere in the world, doesn't have to just be in the United States. And you can find the application on eBird.org right on the main page, and they're due at the end of March. And I will make a note that it is a very competitive application process. We usually get about 100 students applying, and we can only take 16. So if you're thinking about applying, definitely take your time with the application, fill it out very carefully, and of course, let me know if you have any questions about it. The Young Birders event is just one of many, many things that we do here at the lab. And many of you have heard of Merlin and eBird, of course, but we have around 40 other major projects happening here at the lab, including the Great Backyard Bird Count that just wrapped up, and online resources like Bird Academy and Birds of the World, and like everything else listed on this page, and another like 30 other amazing things that are happening. And all these things tie in to our mission at the lab, which is to interpret and conserve the Earth's biological diversity through research, education, and citizen science focused on birds. And that's a very big goal. And it's really not something that we can accomplish on our own. So most of what we do here is done in partnership with a few hundred other organizations around the world, which I think is really exciting, because bird conservation isn't just like a small local problem here in Ithaca. It's something that we need to work on together worldwide if we're going to make a difference. And I really think we're on the right track here. Merlin, which is what I'm going to talk about today, is a great example of a result of those partnerships. So we're aiming for Merlin to be a tool that can be used by anybody, anywhere in the world. And we're really thankful for the work that our partners have done with helping us with things like building bird packs for different countries and translating the app into different languages. So during today's talk, I'm going to focus on Sound ID. And during the talk, I want to answer these 4 questions. So first, why did we bother building Sound ID? How do you use it? How does it work behind the scenes? And what exciting things are coming up next? And before I jump into all that, I want to start by asking the question, why do birds sing? Why do they make all these different noises? For a bird, singing can be really draining. It's very energetically expensive, takes a lot of effort, and making all that noise can alert predators to the location of the bird. So it draws a lot of attention to them. So why bother singing? And ornithologists are still trying to understand the finer details of why birds sing, but in general, we like to say it's to defend and to impress. Male songbirds during the breeding season, like this beautiful Canada warbler here, will claim an area as their territory and defend it from other males. They want to find a very high quality territory with a lot of food and a lot of good places to nest, and they want to make sure other males stay out of their area so that they're not using the resources up, eating their caterpillars, or sneaking in and mating with their females. And they do this by singing, where they're basically just saying like, hey, I'm here, this is my spot, stay away. And singing is also a way to impress potential mates. There's a lot of evidence that the quality of a bird's song is an indicator of the overall health of the bird. So if you're a female Canada warbler, you're probably hopping around the forest, listening to different males to see who has the best song, because he's probably very healthy and will be a good mate in helping raise your chicks over the summer. Birds don't just sing, they make a lot of different calls too, which are just different vocalizations that aren't used to defend territories or attract mates. They make calls for a huge variety of reasons, but a notable reason is to alert others of predators in the area. Many birds have alarm calls that others of their own species will recognize and react to. But the tufted titmouse is a really fun example that I wanted to share because it's not just other titmice that respond to it. Other songbird species like warblers will respond to titmice alarm calls. And there's also some evidence that chipmunks react to their calls too. So mammals even understand what titmice are saying, which I think is super cool. Birds also call to communicate in other ways, many of which we don't fully understand. So a lot of birds like shorebirds, for example, will just peep constantly while they're foraging on mudflats. Or you might hear birds like squabbling with each other at bird feeders, or maybe geese calling constantly while they're flying overhead together in a flock. So there's a huge variety of noises in the bird world. So why bother learning them? And I think the best answer here is that it helps you get so much more in tune with the birds that are around you. Once you learn what the birds sound like, you start noticing them in all kinds of places, even when you're not specifically birding. Maybe you're gardening or walking your dog. And here, as an example, is what I think is a funny picture of me eating very stale birthday cake for breakfast at a campsite on top of a mountain in Arizona last year. And I'm very focused on eating my cake. I'm not using my binoculars, but just by listening, I could recognize and hear all kinds of other birds that were around me, like these beautiful graces warblers that are so high up in the trees that I probably couldn't even see them if I tried with binoculars, and spotted towhees and nuthatches and jays. And that by itself is a really beautiful thing, just to know what's around you without needing to pick up your binoculars and see it. But a cool thing here was while I was listening, I heard something that I didn't recognize. I knew something was different, which made me finally put down the birthday cake and go take a look. And I ended up finding this very, very cute, very tiny buff-breasted flycatcher, which was a life bird for me. So that was exciting. So that really summarizes why we built Sound ID. Knowing what noises birds make can help you understand your surroundings a lot better, and birds themselves a lot better too. But the process of learning bird sounds can understandably be really overwhelming. There are over 700 species just in North America, just in the United States, and each of those makes a variety of different noises. So it can be really hard to figure out where to start. And that also partly answers why Sound ID. We want Merlin to be a way for anybody anywhere in the world to learn more about the birds around them, whether they're already experienced birders or just getting started. And bird noise is a huge component of learning about the birds that are around you. So how do you use it? So if you don't already have Merlin, Merlin is an app that's available for your phone or on your tablet too. It works on iPhones and iPads and on Android phones and tablets too. So if you don't have it already, the first thing you would need to do if you wanted to use it is to go to the App Store on your iPhone or the Play Store on your Android phone and download Merlin. So you'd need to search for Merlin Bird ID. It'll be published by the Cornell Lab. And then once you have it downloaded, you'll need to download a bird pack for the area that you're birding in. Our bird packs now cover over 10,000 species of birds around the world. There's a few more that we're trying to get in there, but pretty much anywhere you are in the world, we should have a bird pack that covers that spot. And I will make a note, you don't need to download a bird pack to use Sound ID. Sound ID works without a bird pack. But if you want to view photos and descriptions and everything else for the species that Sound ID is detecting, you will need to download a bird pack for your area. And then this also isn't required, but if you would like to save the birds that you detect with Sound ID, you'll need to sign in with your Cornell Lab account. It's the same account that you use for eBird or Bird Academy if you've done that before, or if you don't have an account, you can just make one right here. And then to start, you just hit Sound ID, big button at the bottom. So I want to show an example of what it looks like and sounds like when you're using it. So this is a video. There should be sound playing for you all. Let me know if there isn't. But oh, so let's pretend it's late May and you're birding in New York. You can hear birds all around you, but you can't really see them. They're up in the canopy. And you decide to take Merlin out and give it a try. Yeah, so that's beautiful. I love using Merlin in places like that. So that was just an example of what it looks like if you haven't seen that before. But when you start Sound ID, the first thing that you'll notice is the spectrogram that's scrolling across the top of the screen. And that's a visual representation of bird song, where you have time along the x-axis along the bottom and frequency along the y-axis. So noises up higher are higher pitched and noises down lower are deeper. So you can kind of read it like sheet music. As it listens, Merlin will show you best matches for what it thinks the bird is, and it'll note which species are uncommon or rare, and also what species that you've already seen if you're logged in with your eBird account. When you stop the recording, you'll be able to explore the matches that Merlin found and compare what you heard with the songs that are included in the field guide portion of the app if you've downloaded a bird pack. And those will show up here on this screen. So these sounds are really cool. They've been very carefully selected by our sound experts here at the lab to best represent the range of noises that each species can make. So some birds make different sounds at different times of the year, and some species sound totally different in different parts of their range. Like, for example, the Carolina wrens that are in my backyard here sound completely different from yours that are down in Florida, even though they're the same species. So we're very careful in this section here to make sure that the sounds that are in Merlin fully represent all the variety that can be found in each species. Once you're confident, you can save the bird by scrolling to the bottom of those songs and tapping the "This is my bird" button. And then Merlin will ask you if you want to save the bird using Merlin or eBird. And if you're already using eBird, we recommend just submitting a full checklist through there. Or if you choose to save it through Merlin, you can pick a location that you saw the bird, and then it'll get added to your life list. The recordings that you make on Merlin are only saved to your phone. They're not automatically uploaded to us, but you can submit them to eBird to your checklist, which will get them to us. And I'll talk a little bit more about this later. When you're using Merlin, we always encourage you to confirm what you're hearing because Merlin is still learning and it isn't 100% accurate all the time yet. So I think the best way to learn bird sounds is by actually seeing the bird that's making the noise. And I know that's not always possible, but trying to get your eyes on the bird is really best. That helps you like visually confirm and really cements that in your brain a little bit better. And if you can't do that, maybe the bird flew away or it's just up so high that you have no hope of seeing it. That's okay too. Birds are tricky. Birding is not an easy thing sometimes. So the next best thing is to like really carefully go through those songs that are included and compare what you heard to the represented songs that are in Merlin here. Merlin currently includes just over 1,000 bird species in the world that are included in Sound ID. And this is new. We just released an extra like 200 species or so last week. So this is super exciting. The new edition that we put out includes a bunch more species found in Central and South America and a bunch of species in India. So overall, this includes pretty much any bird that you could possibly hear singing in the US and Canada and Europe, and then common and widespread birds of Central and South America and common widespread birds of India. We do have a list of these 1,000 species on the website and also in the app if you're interested in looking through and seeing exactly what species are included in Sound ID. And here's a map of what it looks like right now. So the darker the green the country is, the higher the percentage of birds in that country are covered by Sound ID. So you'll notice here that every country on this map is at least a little bit green. And that means that some birds in each country are identifiable with Sound ID. And those are birds like the sanderling or the northern pintail that can be found almost worldwide. They just have really wide ranges. So Sound ID will work on pintails here in the United States and also work on pintails over in Europe. And a few other birds like house sparrows that have been introduced worldwide, and even birds like that have been introduced in very specific places like chaffinches in New Zealand. So if you were to use Sound ID outside of the US or Canada or Europe right now, it would work on some of the birds, but not all of the birds yet. So Sound ID is an incredible tool that can already help you identify over 1,000 birds, which is an incredible achievement already. But how does it work? And this is something I'm still learning about too, and something that's been super exciting. To help explain it, I want to first explain how photo ID works. So if you're not already familiar with it, you can use the Merlin app to identify birds in a photo that you take as well. So all you have to do is get your photo, open it in Photo ID, and Merlin will tell you what it thinks the species is. And this currently works on about 8,000 species of bird around the world. Photo ID works using computer vision and machine learning to identify birds in photos. So I'm not a computer scientist. So what does this mean? This is definitely a complicated topic. But long story short, we trained a computer model to using images of birds that were annotated, just like here. So we had hundreds of volunteers draw boxes around birds and about 1 million photos, just like this example here. So with enough of these boxes drawn around birds, we can use these to train the computer model to identify the species in the photo and then test it to see how accurate it is. So overall, photo ID is correct 92% of the time, and that's including bad cell phone photos. Like if you snap a picture of a bird flying by really fast, that like those photos combined with good photos, photo ID is correct 92% of the time, which is pretty exciting. And we use a very similar method to train Sound ID. So remember the spectrograms, which are visual representations of bird noise. Just like with photo ID, we're annotating sound recordings by drawing boxes over where the bird is singing. So this is not an easy task. This requires experts in Sound ID to do this annotation because you need to know not just the main bird that's singing, but also recognize any birds that could possibly be singing in the background. So here you can see the very bold song, these dark vertical lines here, the bold song of the black-throated green warbler, but there's also a fainter, much quieter red-eyed vireo whose song overlaps with the warbler. It's probably singing farther away in the background, isn't the focus of the recording, but it's still singing there and Merlin's still picking that up. So you need to be able to recognize those and be able to find it in the recording and draw a box around it. And this can get really, really tricky because if you misidentify a bird noise here, we're training Merlin the wrong thing, and we don't want to do that. So we don't want to teach Merlin the wrong species. So this is done by experts, and eventually with enough of these recordings, with enough of these annotated files, we can train Merlin to recognize bird songs, just like we did with photo ID. So I have a video of how this works. I want to show you how we do this here. And this is sped up. This is not in real time. This is, I think, twice as fast. But this is one of our team members, Matt Medler, who is annotating a sound recording of an elegant trogon. So for each file, we try to draw 5 boxes around the target species, which in this case is the trogon. So that's what he was just doing there in red. And you'll notice there are other bird noises in the background, which Matt has identified as a brown-crested flycatcher. So next he's going through and drawing boxes around all the flycatcher noises. And sometimes, like these green boxes, there are noises you just have no idea what that is, but we know it's a bird, and that's important to tell Merlin that this is a bird. So he's going through and finding all the bird noises that he doesn't recognize and is marking them as unknown. And that will let a different person who's going through these files identify them if they're more familiar with those species, or we can leave it just as unknown. That's okay too. And then that last thing he did, right at the very end there, he drew a box around 1 second of the recording where there was nothing happening. There were no birds calling in that section. And we found that that's really important. We need to not just train Merlin in what birds do sound like, but what they also don't sound like. So we found that those no bird boxes also really help quite a bit. So Once we have a bunch of sound recordings annotated, we can test out how well Merlin identifies the species. And this is where it gets kind of complicated but pretty cool. So this graph is showing how the long-tailed duck is performing in Sound ID. And I picked this because this species is performing very well. So on this graph, we have precision on the y-axis and recall on the x-axis. And these are kind of confusing metrics, so I'll try to explain them. So recall is essentially how often Merlin will suggest the species. So for example, if we test out Merlin on 100 recordings where we know that a long-tailed duck is calling, and Merlin says that there's a long-tailed duck in 90 of them, then Merlin's recall for the species would be 90% or 0.9 on this graph. Precision, on the other hand, is how accurate Merlin is when it suggests a species. So let's say, for example, you use Merlin 100 times, and Merlin suggested a long-tailed duck every single time, but maybe 4 of those 100 were misidentified as a bufflehead or something else. Merlin was wrong 4 times. When it should have said long-tailed duck, it said something else. So 4 out of 100 is only 4%. So that would make Merlin's precision be 96% or a 0.96 on the graph. So that's a little confusing, but basically overall, to interpret this graph here, to help us a little bit, we've drawn some dotted lines at standards that we've set to make sure Merlin is accurate. So we have 0.9, a nice dotted line at the top there for precision, and 0.7 for recall along the bottom. So we're really aiming for this curve of the graph. We want that curve to be in the top right corner in that rectangle up there. If the curve is up in that corner, then that's telling us that Merlin is performing very well and is confident and accurate in identifying this bird. And that's exactly what we're seeing here. So we know Merlin is very confident, very accurate with identifying long-tailed ducks by sound, which makes sense because they have a really distinctive voice. And we've also used 222 sound recordings, annotated sound recordings, to train Merlin in this. So that is a bird with a very distinctive voice. But how does Merlin handle species that sound similar? So I have an example here of 2 species that are very difficult to tell apart, both visually and by song. So we have the Cassin's vireo and the blue-headed vireo, and they're very, very similar, very closely related species. And they have really similar looking spectrograms. If you look on the bottom, the shape of those little curves are really similar. And just like humans have difficulty identifying them, Merlin does too. So you can see the curves of the graph here. They don't quite make it up into that rectangle in the top right corner, which is telling us that Merlin struggles a little bit with the accuracy and confidence here. But in many cases like this, that accuracy, even though it's low, that's okay, because Merlin is using data from eBird checklists to determine what birds are most likely in the area that you're using it. So even though these 2 vireo species are very, very similar in song, if you're using Merlin in New York, for example, it's never going to suggest a Cassin's vireo because that species is not found here. And because it's using eBird data, it knows to just not even bother suggesting that. So cases like this is why we always recommend having your location turned on when you're using Merlin, because you might get some really wacky, very inaccurate results if Merlin doesn't know where you are. This is a map of locations of all of the checklists that have been submitted to eBird around the world. So you can see that the United States is very well covered. It's by far the brightest thing on the map here. Mexico and Canada and Europe and a bunch of other countries here and there are also pretty bright, very well covered. But most of the Earth is still pretty blank. One of my favorite things here, you can kind of see shipping lanes out in the oceans in different places of people birding and reporting birds on cruises or from shipping vessels. So every single checklist that you add to eBird, every time you go birding, whether you're in the middle of nowhere or whether you're in your backyard in somewhere that's already really well covered like Florida, every additional checklist helps us better understand where in the world different birds are found, which in turn helps Merlin. Mimics are another really fun case. This is one of my favorite things that Merlin does. So here's the northern mockingbird. And if you've ever heard one sing, you know that they're really, really good at mimicking. They can sound exactly like the species that they're mimicking. So this graph here is showing us that Merlin has a pretty good chance of identifying it as a northern mockingbird, but it also has a really good chance of identifying the bird that it's mimicking. So it's really cool. It's pretty fun to try out in person. Highly recommend it. Next time you hear a mockingbird, take out Merlin and see what birds it thinks the mockingbird is mimicking. So that's in a nutshell how Sound ID works, and how we've built it and how we're continuing to add to it. So Sound ID is still very, very new. It's only been around since for about 2 years now. So we're still growing, it's still learning. So what's next? Overall, we really want to improve how Sound ID works on species that are already included. Like you saw, the northern mockingbird, some like Merlin struggles with that sometimes. And there are a few other species in it that we're trying to work on improving the accuracy of Merlin. And then bigger picture, longer term goal is to expand Sound ID to more species across more regions of the world. We would really love for someday to have any person be able to open Merlin anywhere in the world and use Sound ID to learn what birds are around them. And we think that's a very achievable goal, but it's going to take a lot of work to get there. And there are a few challenges in the way that I want to talk about. The biggest challenge is that we need a lot of sound recordings. So for each species, we need a bare minimum of 100 sound recordings to be able to consider starting the process of annotating them to train Merlin. And then for most species, we need many, many more than 100 to train Merlin to a high enough accuracy for us to want to put it into Sound ID. So for example, this red-winged blackbird here has a super wide range of noises that it can make. It has a really distinctive song, but it makes all kinds of other calls and other vocalizations. And we need a lot of different sound recordings to fully capture the wide range that this bird can make. And we need those recordings to train Merlin. So if we were only using recordings of the blackbird's song, Merlin could probably do that really well, but it wouldn't recognize the calls or anything. So we need a billion different recordings of different noises that the bird makes. And all the recordings that we use to train Merlin come from the Macaulay Library, which is where your photos, which is where your photos and recordings get archived when you submit them to eBird. So the red-winged blackbird has a ton of recordings in the Macaulay Library. It has over 8,000, which is awesome. And those are all available for us to use in Merlin, which is super cool because for a bird that is this dynamic, we need them. And I see one question here. How long should the recordings be if you were to submit them to eBird? And that's up to you. We ask that they're at least a few seconds long. You don't want to submit just one very short call. So like 10 seconds long or so is a good length, but you can record as long as you'd like. And we do have guidelines for recording and for editing and uploading that I can share later as well. So a lot of species don't have a lot of recordings yet. Even relatively common species in North America, like the scaled quail here, only has 131 recordings in the Macaulay Library right now. So that is not a species that we're able to put into Sound ID yet. And like the black rosy finch only has 79. So there are still species even here in North America that need a little bit of extra help for us to get them into Sound ID. And even in Florida, there's a whole bunch. So most of these species on this list here do have over 100, but they have less than 200 usable recordings. So we need like 100 minimum to consider adding them, but we really need specific types of recordings. So, you know, we don't want 100 recordings of all the same call type. We want a variety. We want different lengths of recording, and we want different qualities. So we want recordings taken with like high-end recording equipment, microphones, and also recordings taken with your cell phone. We need that huge range to train Merlin. So these are the species just for Florida that I wanted to share. But in general, like any recording of any species is useful. We're also especially in need of recordings of birds outside of the United States and Europe. So here's a list of just a few countries. I couldn't list all of them here. And the percentage of species in each country that already have a minimum of 100 recordings available to us. And you can see this is going to be our biggest challenge, like long term. So we want to include as many species as we can worldwide in Merlin, but for most species, we just can't do that yet. And this is where all of you get to come in. So the best way to help is to record the birds that you hear when you're out birding and submit them in your eBird checklist. So recordings for any species can help. It doesn't have to, you don't have to go, you know, halfway around the world and record species to help us, though we would love if you did that. But just recording in your backyard, even really common birds that are already well represented, all those recordings help. So if all you've got is red-winged blackbirds, we already have 8,000 recordings, but we could always use more. So how do you do that? If you're new to sound recording, like I am, it can be kind of confusing to know where to start. But the good news is it doesn't have to be complicated. Sound recording has come a very long way in the last 100 years, and from even from when this photo was taken here. So you don't need this crazy equipment to record high quality sounds anymore. You can just use your phone, which is by far the easiest way. So we recommend using Merlin to record bird sounds on your phone. If you want to, if you are looking for higher quality recordings, you're getting a little bit more into it. There are some really cool external microphones that you can get that are small, that plug into your phone. So you can use Merlin and a microphone like this to really bump up the quality of the recordings. We do have some recommendations if anyone is interested. And if you're really getting into it, there's a huge range of other equipment that you can use, all kinds of really cool microphones. And we need, like I just said, we need a range of different types of recordings. So most people are using Merlin on their phones. So we of course need the high quality recordings taken with equipment like this to train Merlin, but we need the phone recordings too, to also to train Merlin so that it can recognize birds when you're using your phone. If you're interested in learning more, we do have a sound recording course available on the Cornell Lab's Bird Academy website. So this was developed and filmed by my coworkers here in the Macaulay Library. And it's a self-guided course. It's about 7 hours long, and it goes into very, very great detail about every part of the recording and editing process. So I don't have 7 hours to spend with you today, but I do have a few tips from the course that I want to share. So in general, you're going to get better quality recordings if you try to stay as quiet as you can and get as close to the bird as you can. So these tips apply both to when you're making recordings with a microphone, or if you're just using Merlin for fun in your backyard, because it's really the same thing. So one important thing to remember is when you're using a microphone or using Merlin, you are the closest thing to the microphone. You're much closer to the microphone in your phone or the thing you're holding than the bird is. So your microphone is likely to pick up a lot of noises that you are making, like if you're talking, or if you're shuffling your feet on the ground, or if you're like moving your hand around on your phone or the microphone. So trying to minimize movement and minimize sound can really help with the quality of the recording. And it also helps quite a bit to get closer to the bird. And of course, you don't want to disturb it. The bird's safety always comes first. And you also don't want it to stop singing if you're trying to record it. So best practices here, we recommend trying to get a recording of the bird that's singing from far away first when you first hear it, and then take a few steps closer and try to get another recording, and then maybe take a few steps closer and try again, but always keeping the comfort and the safety of the bird in mind when you're doing this. If you're using Merlin to record birds, you probably need to edit the recording just a little bit to at least to trim out any parts, like maybe you're talking at the start, or you have a bunch of clunking noises, and or like really long stretches where there's nothing singing. And you can, to do that, you can't do that right on the app. You will need to send that recording to your computer, which you can do with the share button that's right there on the screen when you go to your My Recordings page. And you can also airdrop it to yourself if you're using an iPhone and a Mac, or you'll need to email it to yourself if you're using like a Windows computer. And then to edit it, we recommend a more specialized program. And this one that I'm showing here is called Audacity. I can share a link to that as well. This is a free program. There's also a few other paid programs if you're looking for something more advanced, but this will do anything you need to do some basic editing to get it into eBird. And I promise sound editing is much less scary than this image makes it look. It's very simple. And we have a lot of detailed information on our website that I can share that walks you through how to do this. And then of course the Sound ID course, if you want to get really into it, will take you step by step through this as well. Once you have the recording edited, you're back home, you're done, you're looking at your computer, you can add those recordings right to your eBird checklist. So if you use eBird, you've submitted a checklist, you can go back into your checklist and click that Add Media button, and it'll take you to a page that looks like this. You can also add photos, which is super fun. But just like you're adding photos, you can drag and drop the recordings right in, or click the Add Media button there and find it in your computer and select it. And then when you submit it, it gets automatically added to the Macaulay Library, which right now has over 1.7 million recordings, most of which were submitted by birders through eBird, just like you, which I think is awesome. Like this is really a community effort here. And it really is birders who we want to thank for the success of Merlin so far. We have this amazing, incredible worldwide community of partner organizations and birders and photographers and recordists in all corners of the world that are all working together to build Merlin and work on all the other conservation initiatives that we work on here at the lab, all because we all want to make the world a better place for birds. And I think that's really cool. And that's why I'm excited to come to work every day here. And that's about all I have today. So thank you so much for having me, and I am happy to take any questions.
Thank you so much, Alli. Anne Marie's question is real basic. How do I submit my Merlin sound recordings to eBird? Could you go back over that?
Yes. So if you're using Merlin, which is the easiest way to do this, and when you open up the sound recordings page and open a recording, you'll see a little share button here up near the spectrogram at the top. And you click that, you can send it to yourself through email, we recommend, and then you would need to edit it by trimming it down a little bit to where the bird is singing, and then submit a checklist through eBird. Click the Add Media button, get it into the checklist under the correct species, and then submit it. And I do see another question about what happens if there are multiple species in the recording. So in that case, we would recommend picking the species that is the most dominant in the recording. If there's like a really loud cardinal in the foreground, that's the focal species for the recording we would consider. And even though maybe there's a warbler or something singing in the background. So in that case, we'd recommend submitting it underneath Northern Cardinal. But in here, you can see there's a details section here. So we really highly recommend including notes. So if you submit a recording, there's multiple species and you know what species are in the recording, it really helps us and our annotators can see those notes. So it helps the annotators out a lot if you're able to give a list of what birds are calling in that recording. But you do have to pick one species to put it under.
I just put in your reference that you'd given me earlier. This is solutions.
Oh, great. Awesome. Yeah, that is a help desk article that goes through best practices for editing sound recordings and uploading them to eBird. So that is much more detailed than I can talk about right now, but that's a huge help. And if you have questions, my email address is right here. Please email me. Happy to help.
Okay. Can you see these questions?
Yes. Yep. So thank you, Chloe. Love the question. What is my favorite bird? This guy right here on the screen is my favorite bird. This is a red knot. He's not very red in this photo, but this is the bird that got me into birding. So I actually got into birding when I was in middle school, when I was in 7th grade, and my science teacher, I'm from New Jersey. My science teacher took me and my class to go to the Delaware Bay, where horseshoe crabs spawn every spring, and where these birds, the red knots, come and eat all the horseshoe crabs to fuel themselves from their migration up to the Arctic. And something about that really stuck with me, and I got super into birding. And then, 12 years later, or longer than that, I've now found my way to Cornell. So yeah, it's all this bird right here.
That's very cool. How about Diane's question? I'm using Merlin for quite a while, but what I don't understand is why sometimes identified birds that it can barely hear yet does not identify a common bird that's much closer.
Yeah, I don't have a great answer to that. Merlin is still learning. The new update to Sound ID that just came out a few days ago really helped with the accuracy of a lot of species. So if you haven't used it in a few days, I'd recommend trying it out again. It really helped in a lot of situations like this. Sometimes Merlin is hearing a bird, but maybe for that species, we haven't annotated enough files of that specific call that bird is making. So Merlin isn't familiar enough with it to recognize it yet. So in general, the solution to improving Merlin is to annotate more sound files. And that's something we're working on very, very hard. We just added another several tens of thousands of new annotations that went into this new model to improving Merlin. So work in progress, but we're getting better every day.
On photo ID, does reporting no match help?
It does. So we get those reports. So we can see that like the list of birds that get reported and that you've selected no match. So that does help us improve photo ID. And we are planning a new update to photo ID sometime this year. The current model that runs photo ID is already 3 years old, and we've learned a lot about machine learning since then. So we're planning on releasing an update for that sometime this year, which I'm super excited about.
Great. And does Merlin work well on simpler sounds like chip notes if night flight calls?
That entirely depends on how many of those sounds we have annotated and trained Merlin on. So we have someone at the lab who is working on nocturnal flight calls. His name is Benjamin Van Doren. But he was looking into this, and he can talk a lot more about it. But to answer your question, Merlin will work on some nocturnal flight calls. Like, it's really good at distinct ones, like thrushes, especially Merlin can identify. But other birds that sound really similar, like a lot of warblers have very, very short chip notes when they're calling at night, and they sound really, really similar. So they're hard for people to identify, and they're equally hard for Merlin to identify. So it's something else that we're working on improving, but test it out, see if it works.
Some of the sound IDs have a small red dot by them. What does that mean?
Yes, the small red dot is indicating that the bird is rare for the area that you are currently birding in. Sometimes there's an orange dot. That means it's uncommon. So not super common, but not super rare either. That can be useful because Merlin is still learning. So sometimes it might detect a bird that isn't actually there. So being able to note that, okay, that's a rare bird, I should look a little bit more closely at that before I report it to eBird. That's just a good signal for you to learn from.
Could you put up the list of species you need more recordings of for Florida?
Yes, here, let me scroll back through that. Yeah, this surprised me too. And this makes sense. A lot of these species are wading birds that are totally silent most of the year, except for at breeding colonies. And I know a lot of your wading birds are nesting right now. So if you've got an opportunity, going out and testing out recording birds at a wading bird colony can be nice, because the birds are in one spot and don't move away from you, which is super helpful. But there's a few other birds, like the Nande parakeet really surprised me. Like there's plenty of them, and they make a lot of noise, but we don't have quite enough recordings for those yet for us to add them to Merlin.
Wow. And someone asked what microphone we could attach to our phone, and Natasha had a suggestion. I don't know if that was for that. Natasha's taken the class. And is this the Sennheiser 400? Is that the one that you're suggesting?
Yeah, I like the Sennheiser. I have the 400 that I don't really use it too much with my phone, but the 400 is really good, and that is about $200, and then the 200 is $99, and it's a really nice, small, very, very, very high quality microphone that I like.
Yeah, that's a great recommendation. I've heard that one recommended before. We've been recommending Rode brand has another, like, it's I think just under $100. A few people here at the lab use those, but I've seen all kinds of different microphones in all kinds of different price ranges too. So there's plenty available. But if anyone has questions for recommendations, especially for higher end equipment, I am not familiar with that. But I have a lot of coworkers that are. So if you send me an email, we can get you answers.
Okay, and your email is Alli.
Here, I can pull that up again. Where are we? There we go. Yep, right at the bottom there.
Okay. Fantastic. Mike from England says he loves it.
That's awesome. It's so cool to hear when people are using it in places outside the United States. Like it's been a ton of work, and we're so excited that everyone is finding it.
Well, that has been just a fantastic program. We got a lot of interest, and we really appreciate you doing it for us, Alli.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm always happy to share more about Merlin, and please do let me know if you have any questions. Always happy to chat by email.
All right. Thanks for coming, everybody. We'll see ya.